Marbell, leave the mail cart where it is and keep your hands visible.
Those are resident letters and monthly statements.
Maribel Tunstall operated without oversight for 9 years as a licensed practical nurse on a locked dementia floor in Brightvale, Arizona. 38 residents depended on her every single day. Not one person checked.
Families reported financial activity connected to this floor.
I don't know anything about their bank accounts.
She had been counting on the families being too tired to look. For 4 years, that bet had paid off. 17 residents on a locked dementia floor in suburban Arizona. $620,000 siphoned out of accounts whose owners could no longer read a bank statement. Checkbooks pulled from nightstand drawers during routine care. Signatures forged by the same hand that fluffed their pillows. The envelope of checkbooks investigators would eventually find in her bedroom included one belonging to a woman who had been dead for 18 months. She had kept it, in case it could still be used. Before we go any further, I have to ask, what would you do if you found out the nurse caring for your parent had been stealing from them for years? Drop a comment and let me know how you'd handle it. And subscribe if you haven't, because we cover the cases that fall through the cracks every single week. The ones built on the assumption that nobody is ever going to check. Maribel Tunstall was born in 1972 in Globe, Arizona, a copper mining town tucked into the Pinal Mountains, about 90 miles east of Phoenix. Her father drove a haul truck for the Miami Globe operation. Her mother worked the lunch counter at a diner on US 60 that closed when Maribel was 11. The family of 5 lived in a 3-bedroom ranch on the east side of town, the kind of house with a chain-link fence around the yard and a swamp cooler bolted into the kitchen window frame. She was the middle of 3 girls. Quiet, her elementary school teachers wrote on her report cards. Reliable. Followed instructions without complaint. The kind of student who never raised her hand, but who turned in every assignment on time and underlined the headings in 3 different colors. She rode the bus to Globe High School, graduated in 1990, and spent the next 2 years working the front counter at a pharmacy on Broad Street while she figured out what came next. What came next was nursing. Specifically, the licensed practical nurse program at Eastern Arizona College in Thatcher, an hour southeast of Globe, where she enrolled in the fall of 1992 and earned her certificate in 1994. She was 22 years old. Her clinical evaluations from that period describe her in the same language her teachers had used a decade earlier. Detail-oriented, patient with confused or combative residents, comfortable with the parts of the job other students avoided. One instructor wrote that she had an unusual tolerance for the slower-paced work of long-term care, meaning she did not, as so many young nurses did, treat geriatric patients as a stepping stone to the emergency room. Her first job after certification was at a small 20-bed nursing home in Safford, where she worked the overnight shift for $9.40 an hour and learned the rhythms of long-term care. Med pass at 6, bed checks at 9. The quiet hours between midnight and 4 when most residents slept, and a single LPN was responsible for a wing of 30 rooms. She told a college friend during this period that she liked the night shift because nobody bothered you. The friend would later tell investigators she remembered the phrase because it seemed strange coming from someone who had picked a profession built around being bothered by people who needed her. She married a man named Russell Tunstall in 1997. He worked as a service writer at a Chevrolet dealership in Mesa. They moved to a starter home in the East Valley, had a daughter in 1999, and settled into the kind of suburban life that bank statements describe in their most boring possible terms. Mortgage payment on the 15th. Utility bill on the 22nd. Direct deposit every other Friday. Russell left the marriage in 2014 after 17 years. Maribel kept the house, the daughter, and the daughter's college tuition bills. The daughter started at Northern Arizona University the following fall. By the time Maribel applied for the LPN position at Brightvale Senior Living in 2016, she was 44 years old, single, raising a college student alone, and carrying about $31,000 in personal debt across 2 credit cards, a car loan, and a home equity line of credit she had drawn against to cover the costs of the divorce. Her starting salary at Brightvale was $42,000 a year. The math, on paper, did not work. It would have to be made to work somewhere else. Her hiring file at Brightvale describes her in language that should sound familiar by now. The director of nursing who interviewed her wrote that she presented as calm, organized, and genuinely interested in dementia-specific care. Her background check came back clean. Her professional license was current and had no disciplinary actions in 22 years of practice. The two references she provided, both former co-workers from a previous facility, said she was reliable, quiet, easy to work with. She was offered the position on a Thursday and started the following Monday on the locked memory care unit. For 9 years, she would work that floor. Same scrubs, same med cart, same 38 rooms. Brightvale Senior Living sits on 12 acres off Pecos Road in a master-planned suburb between Chandler and Gilbert, in a part of Maricopa County that did not exist as suburb 30 years ago. The campus has 4 buildings: independent living, assisted living, a skilled nursing wing, and the locked memory care unit, a single-story brick structure at the back of the property with 38 private rooms arranged in a horseshoe around a central nursing station. The locked unit exists for residents whose cognitive condition has progressed past the point where they can be safely housed in regular assisted living. Some have moderate Alzheimer's, some have vascular dementia, some have Lewy body. A few have frontotemporal degeneration that has hollowed out their personalities while leaving their bodies intact. What they share is a category of vulnerability that the law and the industry have spent decades trying to describe. They cannot reliably recognize their own family members. They cannot remember whether they have eaten. They cannot read a bank statement and tell you whether the numbers make sense. The structural premise of a memory care facility is institutional substitution. The protections that families and intact brains use to provide, the daughter who notices mom is wearing the same shirt 3 days in a row, the husband who reviews the checkbook on Sunday mornings, the resident's own ability to say, "Wait, I did not write that check." All of those protections are gone. The institution is supposed to step in. The institution is supposed to provide the oversight that the disease has stripped away. At Brightvale, that oversight took the form of 2 LPNs per shift on the locked floor, 1 nursing aide for every 10 residents, a director of nursing who reviewed incident reports weekly, and a social services coordinator who maintained contact with each resident's responsible party. The responsible party was usually an adult child, sometimes 2 adult children, sometimes a sibling, sometimes a court-appointed guardian. In a handful of cases, when no family stepped forward, or when family members lived too far away to engage, the responsible party role was filled by a public fiduciary out of the Maricopa County office. The mailroom procedure at Brightvale, on paper, was simple. Resident mail arrived at the front desk each weekday. The receptionist sorted it by room number, placed it in cubbyholes behind the desk, and delivered it to residents during the lunch hour. Personal financial mail, bank statements, investment accounts, anything that looked like it required attention, was supposed to be forwarded to the resident's responsible party, or held at the front desk for pickup, unless a different arrangement had been documented in the resident's file. That last clause was the gap. The phrase, "unless a different arrangement had been documented," was the gap. Because at Brightvale, different arrangements could be made informally. A nurse who had worked the floor for years, who knew the residents better than anyone, who was trusted by families who lived in Michigan and Vermont and could not realistically supervise their parents from 2,000 miles away, that nurse could become, by gradual accumulation, the de facto handler of a resident's day-to-day affairs. She could pick up the resident's mail. She could open it, with the resident's permission, or with what she described as the resident's permission. She could help with birthday cards. She could deposit small checks from grandchildren into the personal cash envelope each resident kept in their drawer. None of this was, by itself, illegal. None of it triggered an internal review. None of it required documentation more elaborate than a handwritten note on a sticky pad. The system assumed good faith. The system assumed that a nurse who had worked the locked floor for 9 years, who knew which resident liked her oatmeal with cinnamon and which one needed extra reassurance before showering, was operating in the best interests of the people she cared for. For most nurses on most floors, that assumption was correct. The first forged check Maribel Tunstall wrote was dated March 14, 2021. It was drawn on the account of an 84-year-old woman named Lorraine, a former kindergarten teacher from Tucson, whose son visited from Albuquerque every 6 weeks. The check was for $200. It was made payable to Monsieur Tunstall. The signature on the bottom was a credible imitation of Lorraine's, traced from the signature card kept inside the front cover of the checkbook. The check cleared on March 17th. Lorraine's bank statement, mailed to the facility under a general delivery arrangement Maribel had set up with the front desk 6 weeks earlier, arrived on April 8th. Maribel signed for it. The statement went into her bag. The son never saw it. Lorraine did not see it either, because Lorraine had not been able to read a bank statement in 3 years. Nothing happened. No phone call from the bank. No flag raised by anyone in the family. No inquiry from the facility. The check had cleared and nobody had noticed. She wrote a second check 11 days later. Same resident. $250. Same outcome. By the end of 2021, she had written 19 checks against 6 different resident accounts, totaling just under $14,000. By the end of 2022, the count was 47 checks, 11 accounts, just over $68,000. By the end of 2023, 91 checks, 15 accounts, $171,000. The method was always the same. The checkbooks lived in nightstand drawers, in dresser drawers, in the bottom of overnight bags that families had packed when their parents moved in and had never thought to remove. During routine care, turning a bed, helping with a clean nightgown, retrieving a hairbrush, she pulled the checkbook out. She wrote the check at the nurse's station during the slow part of the afternoon shift. She returned the checkbook before the resident's next visit. For residents whose families lived nearby and reviewed bank statements regularly, she calibrated. $200 one month, $350 the next, $425 the month after. Amounts small enough that a distant adult child, scrolling through mom's online banking on a Sunday afternoon while half watching football, would attribute the irregularity to mom's confused spending. The check to M. Tunstall looked like the kind of thing a confused dementia patient might write to someone she had decided was her friend. Families wanted to believe that. Families would rather believe a parent was generous than believe a parent was being robbed. For residents whose statements came to the facility, she stopped calibrating. Those were the accounts where she wrote the larger checks. $5,000 to cash in April of 2022. $7,400 to a payee called Sierra Vista Services in September of 2022, an account she had opened in her own name at a credit union in Casa Grande and named to sound like a legitimate vendor. $6,200 to Monsieur Tunstall in February of 2023, $8,000 to cash in November of 2023. She kept a list. Investigators would later recover it. A single sheet of lined notebook paper, folded in thirds and tucked into the envelope of checkbooks at her house, with 17 names down the left margin and a column for each resident's status. Active. POA reviews monthly. POA reviews quarterly. POA inactive. Mail to facility. Deceased. Checkbook retained. The deceased line was Eleanor Borgman, 91 years old, a retired accountant from Flagstaff who had died of pneumonia in the spring of 2023 after 11 months on the locked unit. Her family had been told there were no personal effects remaining. The truth was that Eleanor's checkbook was in Maribel's bedroom. The account had been closed by the bank within 90 days of Eleanor's death, so the checkbook was no longer functional. But Maribel had kept it anyway. She had kept it because, in her notes, there was still a non-zero possibility it could be used. A stale check, a sympathetic teller, a quick deposit before the system caught up. She had not figured out the angle, but she had not thrown the checkbook away. That was the operation. 9 years on the floor. 4 years of escalating theft, $620,000 across 17 residents. The signs were everywhere if anyone had looked. A nurse who had refinanced her home in 2022 and bought a new Subaru Outback for cash that fall. A nurse who took a 2-week cruise to Alaska in the summer of 2023 with her daughter. A nurse whose credit card balances had gone from $31,000 in 2016 to zero by the end of 2024. Nobody at Brightvale ran the math. Nobody at the facility cross-checked the mailroom arrangements against family records. Nobody noticed that the same nurse was signing for an unusual number of bank statements. The director of nursing in 2024 was a different person than the director of nursing in 2016. So was the administrator. So was the front desk supervisor. Institutional memory at a facility like Brightvale operates in 18-month chunks. Maribel had been there for 9 years. She was the institutional memory. Anyone who might have asked questions about her mailroom arrangements had moved on long ago. Stick with me through this next part. We're heading into the moment one family member finally did what the entire system had been built to assume nobody would ever do. If you appreciate cases like this getting the coverage they deserve, subscribe and hit the notification bell. These stories don't make the evening news, but they happen on locked dementia floors all over the country. His name was Andrew Halverson, 66 years old, a retired aerospace engineer who lived in Tempe with his wife and who had been managing his mother's affairs since she entered the locked unit at Brightvale in 2022. His mother, Patricia, was 87. She had vascular dementia. She had not recognized Andrew with reliable consistency in about 14 months. Andrew was the kind of son the operation was not built to handle. He had spent 41 years working contracts at Honeywell in Phoenix, the last decade of it as a project lead on programs where a single decimal point error could cost the federal government tens of millions of dollars. He had retired in 2023. He had time. He had habits. He had a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet was for tax preparation. Andrew did his own taxes, and he did his mother's taxes, and every year between Thanksgiving and New Year's, he sat down at his kitchen table with a stack of bank statements, brokerage statements, and 1099 forms, and he went through the entire year line by line. He had been doing it this way for 30 years. He did not skim. He did not glance. He cross-referenced every entry against a running ledger. He started Patricia's review on the morning of December 27th, 2024. By that afternoon, he had a list of 17 checks he could not account for. 11 of them were made out to Monsieur Tunstall. 3 were to cash. 2 were to a vendor called Sierra Vista Services. 1 was to a payee labeled simply MJT. The amounts ranged from $175 to $7,400. The total, across 6 months, was $19,241. He pulled the previous year's statements. He found more. He pulled the year before that. He found more still. He sat at his kitchen table on the morning of December 28th, with 3 years of bank statements spread across a tablecloth his wife had bought in Sedona, and he ran the math. The total he came up with, conservatively, was somewhere north of $48,000 taken from his mother's account by a person, or persons he could not identify. He did not call the facility first. That was the choice that mattered. A different son might have called Brightvale, asked for the administrator, demanded an explanation. The administrator would have launched an internal review. The internal review would have given Maribel a window to throw away the envelope of checkbooks, the notebook page of names, the list of amounts. The smoking gun would have been gone. Andrew called Arizona Adult Protective Services. Then he called the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and asked specifically for the Financial Crimes Unit. Then, and only then, he called Brightvale, and even that call was carefully scripted. He did not mention the suspected fraud. He said he wanted to schedule a meeting with the administrator to discuss his mother's care plan. The meeting was set for January 9th. By January 9th, the sheriff's financial crimes detectives had already begun pulling subpoenas. They had identified the M. Tunstall on the canceled checks. They had cross-referenced her name against the Brightvale employee roster. They had a list of every resident on the locked unit and a working theory that Patricia Halverson was unlikely to be the only victim. They told Andrew to keep the January 9th meeting, but to act normal. Bring up nothing about the checks. Ask about the care plan. Leave. He did exactly that. The administrator who met with him had been in the role for 14 months and had no idea that the LPN walking past her office door 3 times during the meeting was, at that moment, 2 weeks away from being arrested. The investigation that the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and the Arizona Attorney General's Elder Affairs Unit ran over the next 10 weeks was, in the words of the lead detective, the most thoroughly documented financial crimes case he had worked in 15 years. Not because the crime was complicated, because the records were so good. They started with Patricia Halverson's account. The bank produced full statements, canceled check images, and signature cards going back to 2020. They cross-referenced every check against the signature card. 17 of them, covering the period from October 2022 to November 2024, were inconsistent with Patricia's verified signature, according to the handwriting examiner contracted by the state. All 17 were payable to M. Tunstall, to cash, or to Sierra Vista Services. Then they expanded. Subpoenas went out for the bank records of all 38 residents on the Dementia floor, current and former, going back to 2020. The bank cooperation was, the detective would later say, faster than usual. Banks understand financial elder abuse cases now in a way they did not understand them 10 years ago. By early February, the investigators had a stack of statements 4 feet high and a working pattern. 17 residents. Roughly 920 individual forged checks. $620,000 over 4 years. The handwriting analysis was the spine of the case. 47 exemplars were collected. Old documents from before residents had entered the facility. Signed letters. Photo dedications. The inside covers of books. The examiner produced a report that ran 93 pages. The phrase that mattered, repeated in slightly different forms across the report, was that the signatures on the question checks displayed consistent dissimilarities from the resident exemplars, while displaying consistent similarities to a single secondary writing pattern. That secondary pattern was Maribel Tunstall's handwriting. The examiner had her exemplars from her employment file, her nursing license application, her timesheet signatures. The mailroom records were the second pillar. The sheriff's office subpoenaed Brightvale's visitor and mailroom logs. They found that Maribel had signed for the certified mail deliveries of bank statements for 11 of the 17 affected residents, under what the front desk staff described as an informal general delivery arrangement she had set up years earlier. Some of the front desk receptionists could not remember when the arrangement had started. Some thought it was facility policy. None of them could find documentation supporting it. The Sierra Vista Services trail closed the circle. The account, opened at a credit union in Casa Grande in February 2022, was in Maribel's name. The address on file was her home address in Brightvale. The deposits across 33 months totaled $184,000. There was no business filed under that name with the Arizona Corporation Commission. There was no website, no tax filing, no invoice on file with any resident's family. The search warrant on her residence was executed on the morning of March 11th, 2025. Detectives arrived at 6:51 in the morning. Maribel answered the door in scrubs on her way out for an early shift. They told her to sit on the couch. She sat. She did not ask why. The warrant team moved through the house methodically. In a nightstand drawer in the master bedroom, inside a small fireproof document box, they found a manila envelope. Inside the envelope were 10 checkbooks. Each checkbook belonged to a current or former resident of the Brightvale Dementia floor. 7 were active accounts. 3 were closed. One of the closed ones belonged to Eleanor Borgman, who had died in April of 2023. The checkbooks were arranged in alphabetical order by the resident's last name. Paper-clipped to each was a small index card. On the index card was the resident's full account number, the routing number, the most recent forged check date, and a note in Maribel's handwriting indicating remaining check ranges. Some cards had a single word at the bottom. Active, paused, son visited, watch. Eleanor Borgman's card said, hold, possible reactivation. The detectives logged each checkbook into evidence. The lead investigator would later say, in an affidavit filed in support of the arraignment, that he had executed approximately 210 financial crime search warrants in his career, and he had never recovered a more complete documentary record of a long-running scheme. After the warrant team finished the bedroom, 2 detectives moved Maribel from the couch to her kitchen table. The kitchen looked out on a small backyard where a row of citrus trees ran along the back fence. The detective sat across from her. A digital recorder went on the table between them. The lead detective identified himself, identified the case, read her rights. She nodded. She did not ask for a lawyer. Not yet. Detective: Ma'am, do you understand the rights I've just read to you? Maribel: I understand. Detective: And you're willing to speak with us this morning? Maribel: I can speak with you. He asked her about her employment. She confirmed 9 years at Brightvale, current position LPN on the locked memory care unit, primary shift 7 to 3 weekdays, occasional weekends. He asked her whether she handled mail for any of the residents. She paused for a moment before answering. Maribel: Some of them. Yes, the ones whose families couldn't come in. Detective: And whose decision was that? Maribel: It became part of the routine. Families called and asked me to help over the years. Detective: Can you give me names of family members who asked you to handle their parents' mail? She could not. She gave the name of one family, a daughter in Vermont, that the detectives had already cleared. The daughter, when called later that day, said she had never authorized Maribel or anyone else at Brightvale to open her mother's mail. She had assumed the facility had a procedure. She had never thought about it past that. The detective moved to the checkbooks. He described what had been found in the bedroom. He named the residents. He named Eleanor Borgman specifically. He watched Maribel's face. She closed her eyes. She put her hands flat on the kitchen table. Maribel: I want to talk to a lawyer. The interview ended at 7:41 in the morning. She was placed in handcuffs at the kitchen table. Not loud, not theatrical, just one detective behind her chair, clicking the cuffs into place while the other detective held her purse. She asked if she could change out of her scrubs. The detectives let her change in the bathroom with a female deputy at the door. She came out in a gray sweatshirt and dark jeans. She did not cry. She did not say anything else. She rode in